The northern hills of Pennsylvania have moss on old iron gates, and time is written in the bark of sycamore trees. There used to be a building there that didn't have an address. The official name was written in the arch above its rusted entrance. People in the area called it the Hill House, the Saints' Home, and the Quiet Farm. It's called Ora's House of Restoration for Weak Girls. 1862. That name is no longer used. The stonework fell apart a long time ago, and vines and wet leaves ate it up. The way. The path that led up the hill is now hidden by thorns and forgotten about for decades. Its bones are so far away that you would never know it was there. That's just what the church wanted, but the dead can claw their way back to the surface. I didn't mean to find the ledger when I did. In the middle of October, the university asked me to help catalog parish records from Wren's Hollow's now-defunct diocese. Just another research project I did on my own. Names, dates, and I had a hard time reading the handwritten baptism records. Then I found it in a box of funeral notices that wasn't labeled correctly. Inside was a badly bound leather journal that was sealed with a black ribbon. It had a smell of vinegar and mildew. A list of things that were restored at St. Allah's House from 1862 to 1891 is written across the front in deep, flaking gold script. I had never heard of that name before. In the diocesan archive, there was no file for it. There was also no registry or map. In the ledger, though, there were 143 events. Each one had a girl's first name and a number after it. The fate was written in the last column. Most of the entries just said departed, not even dates or specifics. Some people only had an X, and others had nothing at all. There were no letters of departure, records of adoption, or transfer slips. There were only those names: Elsie, Clara, Rosalind, and Justine, pressed names in ink that is fading. A long time ago, no one had spoken those names. That's when the dreams started. Official church bulletins never said where St. Elora's came from. Putting together whispers from old correspondence and old notices of inspection, a picture began to take shape. In 1861, when the country was at war and public orphanages were full, a cloistered Baltimore nun named Mother Agatha Vale, who was said to have seen the Virgin Mary, suggested building a moral reformatory for young women who were inclined to be bad. It was a simple idea: take away the girls from the world to get rid of temptation. She found a hillside 17 miles from the town of Carrollton. It was on a forest area that used to belong to a lumber company. It was a quiet act, bought on the order of St. Iophene. And in 8 months, the first stone was laid. A school wasn't built. They made a stronghold. There was a main residence hall, a chapel with a bell tower, servant quarters, farming land, and an incinerator connected to a laundry house at St. Laura's. It had 18-inch walls. The windows were tall and narrow. From the outside, the doors were locked with bolts. There were no guests, telegraph lines, or records that could be seen by the public. What it had were rules, doctrines, stillness. In the winter of 1862, the first girls came. 12 of them were between the ages of 9 and 16. Some were left alone. Others came from wealthy families who paid tuition to have their daughters taken away after acts of defiance, promiscuity, or just being too smart. In exchange, they were told they would be saved morally. It cost something to be saved, though. Letters from a former groundskeeper named Elias Furlow, that were found decades later in the attic of his grandson, were found to say that the girls were taken off their names when they got there, given groups dressed in gray wool, with their heads cut off and voices recorded. He wrote that they should be quiet and clean before being killed, like lambs. Mother Agatha didn't see herself as a guardian, but as a mystic midwife who used pain to turn bad girls into saints. She thought sin was so deeply rooted in the bones that they had to be dug up in order to be forgiven. Her methods were based on old artistic practices like fasting, flagellation, and staying alone for long periods of time in dark rooms called reflection chambers. Sister Marcella, who was her second in command, used to work in a French prison convent. She was in charge of punishments and physical changes. A note written in the margin of an inspection report says that Marcella called bruises flowerings of obedience. Then there was Sister Eugenie. She used to be an apothecary and kept tinctures and herbs that were used for spiritual cleansing in a locked cabinet. She said she could clean the girls' sins. Actually, she gave them drugs that made it hard to remember things, kept them from sleeping, and made them feverish, and seeing things in their dreams that would later be used as confessions. The staff moved through in groups of 3, always being quiet and watching. Journals were taken away. Letters sent home were either rewritten or thrown away. People told the girls that no one would believe them, so they gave up trying to talk. In the spring of 1865, St. Theoras was last talked about in public. In a local parish newsletter, one paragraph said, "We praise Mother Vale and her sisters at St. All for their ongoing work. May there." After that, there were no more newspaper articles, official church inspection reports, or survivor testimonies, just silence until now. I held the ledger in my hands for days, not sure what to do with it. Every time I opened it, I felt like I was breaking into a grave. I couldn't sleep or eat, and I dreamed of faceless girls standing behind narrow windows, muffled voices from under floorboards, and a bell that rang where there was no tower. Eventually, I took time off work and drove to Wren's Hollow, the last known location. Wren's Hollow is an old coal town in the valley that is slowly dying. At a diner off of Route 29, I asked a server if she had ever heard of St. Alla. She paused and then whispered, "You mean the Hill House?" People in Pennsylvania called her a saint. Mother Agatha Vale came to the state with 3 trunks, a worn-out leather Bible, and a presence that could silence a room. She was only 5 feet tall, but her voice was low and controlled. It was always measured and never rushed. She was rushed, and her eyes were as sharp as slate and held a gaze long enough to scare grown men. She said she had been called. In her personal letters, which were kept secret by a priest who had doubts about her from the start, she wrote about seeing the Immaculate Virgin standing in ash and shining. The vision told her to clean the nation's girls of impurity and build a house of obedience in a land that was in chaos because of the Civil War and broken families. She thought that morality was eroding like the banks of the Mississippi. So she built a wall, both literally and figuratively, to keep the world's evil out and the holy inside. But she wasn't the only one who did it. Like any cruel empire, Saint had its architects, and each one did their job as precisely as a cathedral clock. Sister Marcella was the enforcer. She was tall, strict, and made from old discipline. She came from a closed convent in Normandy, where physical suffering was seen as holy, and she wore a leather cloak. The strap under her habit was wrapped around her ribs to remind her of the divine pain. Her hands were big and calloused from years of manual penance. Marcella was in charge of both physical and mental discipline. Girls who refused were put through the stations of reflection, a ritualized punishment based on the passion in which each station represented shame, denial, restraint, or hunger. She thought that pain was the only honest way for the impure to communicate. One note from an anonymous girl says, "She made me kneel in rice for 2 hours. I couldn't feel my legs. Let your body break so your spirit can live," she whispered behind me. Sister Eugenie was the mind healer. Not all scars could be seen. Sister Eugenie, with her soft voice and nice manners, sold healing tinctures and cleansing teas. In reality, she was a chemical manipulator. Before she joined the order, she had trained as an apothecary and mixed foxglove belladonna dura, LD and UMS substances meant to make girls weak, give them visions, and make them quiet. The girls who drank her infusions. In the ledgers, these events were called episodes of grace. Girls who reacted violently were sent to isolation. Girls who saw angels or the Blessed Mother were paraded during chapel to show how they had changed. Their delusions became tools. Eugenie kept detailed records of each subject's tolerance, behavior, and ability to be manipulated. She thought of it as spiritual pharmacology. Brother Thorne was the builder and the only man who was allowed on the grounds. Thorne said he was a defrocked Jesuit, but there was no record of his ordination. He was tall, silent, and had yellowed fingernails and ink-stained palms. He wore his cassock button to the throat and never looked anyone in the eye. He built the reflection chambers, the underground tunnels, and the night corridors so staff could move around without being seen. At night, he oversaw the work of the Quiet Choir, which was made up of drugged, half-sleeping girls who were forced to clean, carry, and keep order in the building. Sister Isolde was in charge of keeping records. If Eugenie numbed the mind and Marcella broke the body, Sister Isolde erased the memory. She was the most dangerous because she erased the girls' memories, not because she hurt them. Girls he liked were never seen again. Tools went missing from the laundry room. Locks were tightened. The chapel basement was off limits, and no one dared to ask why his boots were often muddy late at night. She handled all communication with families, wrote letters, filed fake progress reports, and signed names in the girls' own handwriting. She studied their speech patterns and copied their phrasing to give the outside world the impression that everything was fine. If a family asked too many questions, Isolde would say something like, "Your daughter is growing spiritually and developing beautifully. Earthly things will not help her get ready." She also. The white ledger, which was used for official records in diocese, was kept up to date. It had names, dates of admission, baptismal status, and transfers written on it. There were no deaths, accidents, or other problems. The red ledger, on the other hand, was hidden under her cot under an oilcloth. There are no headings, only numbers and short, harsh notes. Number 31, refused communion taken away. Number 58, spoke in the middle of the night. Confession didn't work. Moved around. Mimir 111, tried to get away, changed jobs. It wasn't clear what TT stood for until, a long time later, what Agatha taught. Mother Agatha's spiritual philosophy was a mix of Catholic doctrine, medieval mysticism, and mind control. Some of the sermons she wrote were called The Womb of Obedience, Penance as Architecture, Breaking the Mirror, and Eraser of Selfhood for Glory. She thought that every girl was a vessel that needed to be emptied and then filled with divine light. She said that in order to do that, the name, the voice, and the memory must first be erased. That's not what she called the girls. She told them her presence. By 1870, there were usually about 6,070 girls living at St. Elora at any given time. Still, the annual intake was more like 20-30. Where did they go? There were no graves, transfers, newspaper clippings, or notices explaining why people were leaving. It never went up or down, though, because Agatha, Marcella, Eugenie, Isolde, and Thorne had built something much scarier than a prison. They had made a system that could clean and erase itself, and while the world was busy with wars and diseases, allow it to happen. A girl named Clara Mallon wrote one of the pieces of a confiscated journal that was found in 1902 when a nearby barn was being torn down. It says, "I can't say my name. They call me 41. I haven't seen the outside world in 5 months. My friend Elsie was taken during night prayers. Her bed is gone. Her name is gone. No one says anything. The silence is thicker than the walls. I think she died. I think I will too. The world never ran out of girls. The people who were kept in the white ledger had clean names, dates of arrival, parish sponsors, and payment statuses. But there was a much darker truth behind that thin sheet of paper. The selection process wasn't random or kind. It was a machine designed to control people through fear, profit, and the silent cooperation of those who didn't ask questions. It all began with a letter. Rich families were first in line. They didn't call it what it was, not expulsion, not. They used euphemisms like moral retreat, temporary seclusion, and religious reform to describe what they did. If a girl became too disruptive, too rebellious, too smart, or too loud, she was sent away for her own safety. It was easy. A priest or family advisor would suggest St. Ella. A donation was made, and a carriage was sent. There was no return date, and no paperwork followed the girl. There was no trial, no crime, just a soft disappearance into the hills. In exchange, the families got letters from Sister Isolde. For working-class girls, the process was harsher. They came from overcrowded orphanages, farms with lots of debt, or poor urban parishes where morality patrols roamed like wolves. All it took was a whisper that a girl had been seen laughing with a boy or walking alone at night. There were no charges or defenses, just referrals to the church's morality patrol. The conservative dioceses pushed for the Custody Act in the 1860s, which let girls who were thought to be at risk of abusing their power be sent to an institution with the blessing of the church. These girls came in the dark, often in chains. They were the ones who screamed, fought the intake, and smashed the chapel doors. But after a week of reflection and a sip of Sister Eugene's cleansing tea, the fight was gone. By the second week, they didn't speak, and by the third, they didn't remember. Once they were inside, each girl was. The girls were given a number that would determine their whole lives. The staff didn't call them by name, but by category, such as grave candidate, fit for servitude, to be transferred, or spiritually irretrievable. The girls weren't told about these categories, but they controlled everything from their diet to their dormancy to their ultimate fate. The selection process was overseen by Mother Agatha and Sister Rebecca Marcella's niece, who joined the order at age 19 and quickly became the manager of new members. One look at a shaking girl's posture or a whispered confession during prayer told her if the child would break, bend, or burn. Her notebook, which is kept in the Vatican's sealed archives, had useful descriptions of the girls, such as number 28 being passive and disassociative, promising for work, number 36 being defiant and unbroken, risky and suggesting retreat, and number 47 having expressive eyes and a strong bond with dorm mates, dangerous, and suggesting termination. The FS girls learned how to do laundry, cook, or they were given better books to read and eventually sold without being officially sold, but through a network of placements set up by wealthy churchgoers. These were indentured contracts signed by St. Elora's leadership in the girls' name, and once they were placed, they were no longer found on any records. The families who took them thought they were saving lost girls, but in reality they were buying well-trained, traumatized servants who would never question orders or speak out of turn. Those marked GC were different. They were the ones who wouldn't follow the rules, who refused to be taught, and who kept their own identity even after days of fasting or being sedated. Once they were labeled, their fate was simple. Within a month, they would disappear. Sometimes they would go to reflection chambers, sometimes to medical trials, and often to the furnace behind the laundry house that Brother Thorne lit every night. The ledger never used the word death. It used words like departed, ascended, or blank. Then there were the TT girls. They were marked to be transferred, but they were never transferred. Instead, they were taken into the night corridors. Survivor testimony is very rare, But Sister Mary Caldwell, who escaped in 1892 and lived the rest of her life as a quiet laywoman in Vermont, left behind a single sheet of notes that were found hidden in the hollow of her crucifix after she died. On it, she wrote, "They came. There are always two of them after Vespers. One had the rope and the other the lamp. The girl would have a gag on her. We were told not to scream. People told us they had gone to work in Heaven's Vineyard, but I heard screams in the basement and saw the fire never go out." The choice wasn't just based on convenience. It was spiritual warfare that happened behind closed doors, backed up by the Bible and reinforced by silence. Girls were not safe even after the first year, because the longer they stayed, the more valuable they became. And the riskier. Once, a girl started making friends, remembering things, and asking other girls where they had gone. She was flagged right away. In the words of Sister Isolde, it was the spark of re-individuation and a threat to the ecosystem of obedience. Either those girls were broken again, or they were taken away. There wasn't a third choice. In 1875, the process was so well honed that the assessment of new patients only took an hour. Sister Rebecca would talk to the new girl while the welcome prayer was going on. But she was making profiles like a chess master reading her opponent by writing down her reactions and figuring out her tone of voice and body language. That hour would decide the rest of her life. After the test, the girl would be taken to the dorm for her group. No one said why some halls had softer mattresses or why some dorms were empty for a few months and then never got filled up again. A piece of a baptismal record found in a collapsed drain pipe during 1974 reconstruction work was the scariest thing that was found. 23 girls' names had been erased. Use acid to clean. Only one could still be read. Clara Maline was baptized in 1864 and moved in 1866. That being said, there were no receiving institutions, no signed orders, and no confirmation. That one word written next to her name in faded ink has been erased. It's not sound that Elora was made for. The floors were made of stones. The ceilings were high, and the walls were lined with horsehair that was thick enough to block out noise. Iron hinges held the doors together, which were made of solid pine. The windows were narrow, tall, and couldn't be opened from the outside, even. The birds stayed away from each other. This wasn't what caused the silence. That was the point. The girls were told the same thing from the moment they walked in. Speech is sin until it is made holy. Girls were put on vocal fasting for the first 30 days. This was a rule made up by Mother Agatha that was similar to monastic silence but stricter. It was hard for them to whisper, talk, hum, or cry out loud. You could hear them. For a single offense, there was reflection time in a dark cell below the dormitory that was no bigger than a coffin. Stood there. No bed, no candle, and only the sound of stone and breath can be heard. There is just enough space to sit, but not enough to stretch out. Some girls were hurt when they got out. Some people didn't come out at all. The shape of the building was like a cross. The dorms were in the horizontal wing. From the chapel to the incinerator, the straight spine led down. The cellars below made a maze that was used to store things or punish people. There were small openings in every hallway so that staff could watch without being seen. The dorms all had a locked trap door to the basement. Brother Thorne walked the halls at night with only his lantern for light. The girls called him the Shadow Man. It wasn't said that he was there. He just showed up as a black cassock that was slick on the stone floor like wet parchment. People could hear his keyring before he got there. It's always too late. No one spoke out loud in the dorms' names. The Hall of Salt, where newcomers were scrubbed until their knees were raw. The dorm of grace for girls who were thought to be good kept them healthy and ready for setting up. The cold ward, which wasn't really a name, was where girls who were sick or acting up were sent. Few came back. The beds were labeled. Every day, whether the girls were still in them or not, they were all stripped down and made over. Clara Malin, who was number 41, hid a piece of chalk in the seam of her mattress. She put a cross on the bottom of her bed slat every time a girl went missing. There were 6 marks by the 12th week. She tried to find them by the end of spring 13. She remembered their names, such as Prayers, Elsie, who laughed in her ear while doing the laundry, Winterfred, who cried into her pillow when she thought no one was looking, Jo, who used her finger to count the birds on the dorm wall. They were all gone without a trace. In the middle of the night, they shared dry bread and sung psalms. It wasn't asked why or how the bed was made in the morning. Their number was taken off the board. In the dark, Clara reached out and touched Elsie's arm one night. She put her hand on the cold linen, not a thing else. Girls learned not to ask. When someone whispered, "Where is she?" Sister Marcella showed up right away. Soon after, punishments were given to everyone in the dormitory, not just the speaker. It was what Marcella called communal atonement. It was called the Weeping Fast by the girls. 3 days with no food and the same hymn over and over. No one asked again after that. The only time they could talk was once a week in chapel during group confession. Each girl stood, bowed her head, and said over and over, "I have sinned in thought and silence. I give up my." Sister Isolde kept a behavior book and marked people down when they didn't recite the words word for word. The girl got 3 marks and was moved to the cold ward. Some people called it the death wing. Everyone on staff didn't know the name. Clara's chalk journal was later found scratched under a floorboard. On the few pieces that were found, it says, "I tried to talk to Winifred today. She turned away." Now, her eyes are always wide, even when nothing is going on. She sees, something that the rest of us don't have. She sat up in bed last night and said, "The fire is coming." Then she went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. She wasn't there this morning. With each person leaving, the air in St. Elora got heavier. Girls jumped when they heard keys, slept with their backs to the door, and ate without making a lot of noise. Sister Eugenie was said to bring special tea to the cold ward sometimes. Brother Thorne was said to have chains in the furnace room, and some women were said to have been raped. The beds were always made, but they were never given out. There was a room in the building that didn't have a door, and even the outside was controlled. Girls could spend an hour a day in the sun in a courtyard with high stone walls, as long as the weather was nice. They named it the Garden of Sorrow. There was a dead tree in the middle, where the girls had to dig shallow trenches to get ready for being humble. For years, they stuck with the same shovels. It's easy for little hands to wear down the handles. They didn't see where the dirt was. Went. Clara wrote, "Every 3rd day, they make us dig holes in different places. They say it's for discipline, but the holes are the size of graves. I think they are graves. Last week, I saw Joe's cross necklace in the dirt near one of the holes. I buried it just in case someone is watching." It wasn't the beatings or the cold that broke the girls down. It was the silence, the slow loss of connection, and knowing that no one was coming, and that to speak was to disappear. That friendship was it was fatal to know that the staff wasn't trying to change them. They were trying to get rid of them. The fire started in the laundry house just after midnight in the fall of 1866. By morning, the building was mostly blackened brick and curling rafters. The air smelled of burned wool and something heavier, something sour and metallic that stuck to the grass for days. The official cause was a lantern that set a careless rag on fire. The official death toll was 3. Girls lost. Their names never entered into the red ledger. The staff claimed they had been visitors. No one outside questioned it, but the charred bones recovered beneath the collapsed lintel told a different story. They were chained together at the ankles. Mother Agatha sent a letter to the Dasseys requesting a replacement staff member, someone with medical training, preferably quiet, unmarried, and devout. What she got was Sister Corvina Bell, a novice from the coastal convent of St. Thala. Corvina was 24, bright-eyed, and she was eager to help because her order was known for taking care of war wounds. She had seen limbs cut off, fevers, and men slowly dying with blood in their lungs, but nothing had prepared her for the silence of St. Elora. She arrived by cart without a guide, and Brother Thorn greeted her with nothing but a nod at the gate. The first thing she noticed was how cold it was, not just the temperature, but the atmosphere as well. There was no laughter, chatter, or there was a monastic hush that wasn't even normal for a cloister. Sister Marcella gave the tour and told the people there not to ask too many questions. They also weren't to talk to their families or keep journals or personal items. All letters had to go through Sister Isolde to be read. Marcella said in a flat voice that it was better to focus on the eternal than the earthly. Corvina's job was to watch over the younger girls at night, give out medicine, and clean minor wounds from spiritual. What she saw was strange. Every few nights, a different group of girls between the ages of 12 and 15 would disappear from their dorm. They would only be gone from 2 to 4 a.m., not all day. They always came back by sunrise, tired, pale, and sometimes limping, but they never said where they went. On her 10th night, Corvin got up early for matins and walked down the West Wing corridor. At the far end of the hall, she saw a lantern moving in the dark. Behind Brother Thorn, 6 girls walked down the stairs behind the chapel and toward the incinerator wing. They looked half asleep or high, and their faces were blank. She pressed herself against the stone, her heart thudding. She would not see them again for 3 days. The next morning she asked Sister Eugenie where the girls had gone. Eugenie didn't blink. "They go to the night choir," she said. Corvina blinked back. "I've never heard of that." Eugenie smiled a small, sad smile and said, "It's not for the newcomers." She didn't say anything else. Corvina started writing notes illegally between the pages of her psalter. On October 16th, girls 132 and 28 were reported missing from dorm 3B. They were found the next morning, and girl number 22 had bruises on her wrists. On October 21st, someone was heard crying in the cellar hallway. The doors were locked, and no one answered when they knocked. Chapel candles were already lit at 4 Hauserou. On October 24th, a girl named Leta, who was 14, was taken off of garden duty and was missing for 2 days. She came back with, she looked at the girls and didn't say a word for 48 hours. When she tried to talk to them alone, most of them looked right through her. Some flinched at her voice, and one whispered, "Don't ask." Corvina started to fall apart. She stopped sleeping and started jumping at footsteps. She started checking her own doors 2 or 3 times a night. She dreamed of a choir of girls with sewn mouths singing hymns she had never learned. When she got back to her bed one night, her psalter was gone, and a slip of paper was in its place. Mother Agatha. The next day, Sister Isolde made her go through old baptismal records as a punishment that looked like office work. In the bottom of a water-damaged crate, she found a register with burn marks along the edge. The ink was badly burned, but the names of 17 girls, all of whom had been baptized in 1866, and all of whom were marked Deo Vocata, called by God, were legible. None of those names showed up in any dorm, in the ledgers, or on rosters. Marielle Coates was one of the names on the register. 3 letters, MC, were written in blood on the inside of the infirmary storage cabinet. That night, Corvina went against her orders and followed the lantern light down the stairs behind the chapel to the door she had never opened. It was unlocked and led to a stone corridor lined with hooks, iron restraints, a basin that smelled of bile and bleach, and a stack of worn hymns with. There were blank pages and a small human-shaped canvas pile in the corner, but she didn't look for it because she ran away. When she caught up with Mother Agatha the next morning, Agatha just nodded and said, "You weren't ready. Now you are. Now is the time for your promise to be quiet." Sister Corvina Bell was moved to the cold ward that night. She wouldn't be seen again for 11 months. At the very end of the west wing stood the furnace. The chimney was black with soot and always smoked, even in the summer. It was known. The girls called it the Wall of Ash, but that's what the sign said. People who lived nearby said that the walls next to it leaked black blood and that the stone was always warm to the touch. They also said that at night, if you put your ear to the bricks, you could hear breathing. They had a point. Brother Thorne's first building when the asylum was being built was the incinerator. A huge brick building with iron doors the size of coffins and a loading chute in the back that can only be reached through a hatch that is bolted shut. It was said to burn refuge linen, spoiled food, but it ran all the time, day and night, even when the laundry piles were full. There was never any room for girls. Before the rains in 1870, no one had ever seen what came out. That spring, a flood from a nearby creek filled the lower corridors with water. The stone started to break, the mortar turned black, and bone pieces showed up in the overflow drain behind the incinerator. They were stuck in the grill work when a maintenance man from a nearby seminary came to check on them. There was a broken jawbone and a silver cross around the edges. The things were quietly gathered, put in boxes, and marked as medical specimens. The man was never asked to come back. In Brother Thorne's workshop, behind the furnace, there was a unique ledger bound in dark leather and stamped with only the letter T. There were plans for modified wagons, false bottom crates, and sealed ash bins inside. Each entry had a date, a weight, and some notes. Number 59, unstable. Last weight, 701. Number 104 passed away while being sedated. Burnt within 36 residue dense. Double cycle is suggested. It only has numbers, no names. This was the same number that the girls wore on their uniform sleeves. The staff never spoke out loud about the furnace. It hung over the asylum like a second cross, though. Once you were called a GC grave candidate, every girl knew about it. You only had a week. It would be late at night when they call you. You said you wouldn't come back. The next thing that happened was a ritual. Sister Eugenie served her last cup of tea. Sister Marcella shaved the girl's head. One last hymn was sung in. That chapel, which no one else could go to. It was known as the Narrow Ascension, but not every girl was burned. Some were thought to be good candidates for placement. These were the FS girls who were good enough to work. They learned how to sew, cook, fix things, and be obedient. They were taught not to speak unless told to bow their heads when asked, and to read from the Bible when told to. Once they were ready, they were sent out through a network of church-related donors, wealthy families, boarding schools, and even missions abroad. For real, these places were holy. In reality, they were contracts that required them to work for free in exchange for giving money to the order. No one checked in. They never came back. Each girl was reduced to work potential, and a page from Sister Isolde's secret ledger says, N91, sold to Herrick Estate, New York. Documentation forged. 6-month trial set up. NA95 not suitable for placement. Refused scripture. Reassigned to Wallen 96 strong minimal resistance approved for shipment to Lisbon. The entries are cold and transactional. People who served brought in money. People who complained were kicked out, and people who disappeared into ash were never seen or heard of again. By 1875, the system was running smoothly. Mother Agatha was in charge of money matters. Sister Isolde was in charge of paperwork, including making fake travel documents, letters to families, and false parish transfers. Sister Eugenie gave out drugs and poisons, Brother Thorn disposed of bodies, and Sister Marcella made sure there was strict discipline. Every time someone went missing, there was a paper trail, but none of them led back to the person who did it. Each family got a letter saying something like, "Your daughter has found peace in the mission fields. She has taken a vow of silence and will not be writing further. She succumbed to illness, but her soul was clean." The letters were beautiful. They were written in the girl's own hand and copied by Isolde after weeks of study. They each had a closing prayer and a postscript. She remembered you in her last breath. Girls who cried for too long were given painkillers, and girls who screamed were led to the garden and told to dig their own shallow trenches as part of humility exercises. Many people started to believe what the place said. It was better to be chosen than to be burned, better to disappear into someone else's home than into smoke, better to serve in silence than to be silenced forever. In 1876, a priest from Boston went to see Father Dwyer to look into rumors of impropriety. He stayed for 2 days, didn't ask many questions, and ate alone. On the morning of his departure, he was given a stole that had been hand-stitched by 6 different girls in the FS class. 3 weeks later, Father Dwyer gave $2,000 to the Order of St. Iophene and wrote in his report, "Straw is a shining example of redemptive education." I did not see any wrongdoing. The 6 girls were all gone by the time his letter got to Rome, and the fire kept going year after year. Until the stones turned gray, the chimney cracked, and the grass below it wouldn't grow. Until the wind that blew through the courtyard carried the faint smell of wet wool and old teeth. The soot marks on the bricks are still there, even though the building has been torn down for a long time. They don't get washed away. They'll never do it. Every 3 hours, the bells of St. Elora tolled. Like air being sucked through stone lungs, vespers, matins, prime, and ter sound like breath. The girls walked and prayed next to them and slept and woke up next to them. Theirs. Still, the bells did not ring on the night of June 14th, 1878, when there was a very heavy storm. Just before midnight, lightning hit the east spire. There were burn marks on the ropes in the bell tower and the cross's peak. That night, not even Brother Thorn was brave enough to go up. And then there was a silence that no one had ever heard before. A girl got away at St. Elora. Her name was Joanna Wren. She was 13 years old, lived in dorm number 2, and was marked as FS conditional because she was obedient and good at embroidery. But the girls didn't see one thing about Joanna. She remembered. She thought of Letta's laugh, thought of Clara's chalk marks. She thought of the girls who had left at night. She knew that the bells would ring until they stopped. That night, Joanna slipped through the open gate in the garden wall while her sisters worked hard to fix the damage from the storm. The southern corner was crushed when the old willow fell. The breach wasn't seen until the next morning. She ran barefoot across too. She walked through miles of sod pasture until she got to the cottage of a gamekeeper at the edge of Harrow's Wood. She passed out on his porch. The man was 61 years old, had lost his wife, and was partially deaf. His name was Gareth O'Connell. When he opened the door and saw a girl who was wet, shaking, and covered in sores, he took her inside right away. He gave her bread, wrapped her in a blanket, and listened as she spoke in bits and pieces. It was the first time in months that she had used her voice. She told him about the digging and the silence they had on their sleeves. She told him about the West Wing smell and the night choir. O'Connell didn't sleep that night or the next. After 3 days, he took the girl to the nearest parish office in Renford to file his report. The account was met with skepticism by the bishop's office. The girl had been hurt, was confused, and might have been unstable. The second letter, however, came in an envelope from New Haven that was not signed and was sent from someone else. A picture of a burned cross necklace with a list of 12, first names, all with dates of transfer written next to them, and a quote written in a hand I didn't know. They went down to the chapel and never came back up. It matched the baptismal records that Sister Corvina had found, but those records had been lost the year before. Someone else knew. Someone inside. Saint Allah was looked over quietly for the first time in 27 years. It wasn't an investigation or an accusation. It was just a visit from the archdiocese. Early in August, 2 priests and a diocesan secretary rode in on horses. Mom. In the chapel, Agatha greeted them with bread, wine, and the Bible. She gave me the ledgers that had just been rewritten. She gave her word in a bundle of silk and incense. It took the priests 48 hours to stay. They left with examples of embroidery, copies of daily hymns, and 3 letters written in a script that looked like it was made by a child. I love it here, Papa. Every day, I pray for you. Mother Agatha says, I will be ready to visit soon. Your obedient daughter, Rosalie. The letters were fake. Rosalie had passed away 6 months before. Her ashes had been. The laundry slag was thrown behind the gas stove, but someone else saw Joanna get away. A 16-year-old kitchen girl named Mara Lang, who was known for being quiet and having a strange memory, saw Joanna leave through the crack. She didn't say anything for weeks until Sister Eugenie, a nun, put lodam in her tea after morning prayers. Mara fell while cleaning the floor. As soon as she woke up in the hospital, she started speaking clearly, quietly, and in the rhythm of a witness. She wasn't afraid to die. She walked away, not ran. There was no wall there. She didn't care about the bells. Mara was moved to the cold ward within 48 hours. She was gone in 72 hours. Back in Harrow's Wood, Gareth O'Connell found a note on his door that wasn't signed. Leave the girl on the steps of the chapel. You will not be told this again. He didn't follow the rules. Instead, he used a fake name to get Joanna on a coal train to Boston. Someone who used to be a nurse and had served in the War of the Rebellion took her in. What happened to Joanna Wren? From 1880 records. But from 1884 to 1909, Miss J. Ward worked at a Vermont girls' shelter and wrote, "The silence in some institutions is not peace. It is burial." She never signed her name, though. The bells were fixed back at St. Elora. When they rang again, the cross was made again, and this time they were louder than ever. It was like the voice of a place reasserting its control over its ghosts, but the walls were broken. Someone was no longer there. There was a voice, and when silence is broken, it can never be whole again. They thought Clara Maylene was dead. In 1862, she was just 16 years old, shy and pale. She was marked as unsuitable and sent to the cold ward. No one had ever asked why she went missing. Her name had been crossed out on the dormitory slate, and the ledger had been cleaned of her things. Clara wasn't dead, though. She got away, and she remembered everything. She went back in 1880 under the name Sister Elora Miles. St. Bridget sent her to watch over the practices at St. Elora and write a report on how clean they are spiritually. There were gray streaks at Clara's temples, and her eyes never closed for long. She was 34 years old at the time. Her tone was even and her voice was soft. She looked beautiful in her veil. She knew just what to say. You name it, she knew where the records were buried, the secret stairwell, and the spot where the floor under Dorm 3 creaked just once. Even though Mother Agatha was thinner, she was still very smart. When she wrote, Her hands shook a little. She gave Sister Elora a warm, well-practiced welcome, being friendly. It's been a while since Bridget came to visit. Clara smiled and said, "I go where I'm needed." She meant it. She had been waiting 18 years to walk back through those stone hallways and see the piece of chalk still stuck behind bed number 41. She wanted to kneel next to the rusted grates where the ashes were swept and look up at the ceiling of the cold ward again, remembering how her voice had been silenced there. At night, Clara sneaked out of her room and made a new map of the asylum, noting guards and changes, as well as the quiet paths of the night choir that is still in use. The girls didn't cry anymore, though. It was no longer a question. The pyre burned only once a week, which was more efficient and less obvious. The people who trained them were younger and broke them down faster. From the East Hall, Clara saw two girls being led under the chapel. One limped, and the other held on to a rosary like it was life. Neither came back by morning. Clara found her sister, who was old at first and is now older and almost. He was blind, but he was still writing down ledgers in ink that was blacker than sin. When she spoke, her voice was like dry parchment and denial. "We get these girls in pieces. We taught them how to obey again." It was about Joanna Wren that Clara asked. His cellar's face didn't change. The wolf always goes back to check out its own tracks. Clara said in a whisper, "Some wolves are back with fire." Clara found her old psalter in the infirmary supply cabinet. It was hidden behind some loose panels, just like she had left it almost 20 years ago. Inside were records of people who went missing, written in code, chalk tallies, dates, and initials. There was a tear in the page. Under the back flap of the book, she saw the last note, written in blood that was as faint as rust. "MC Fire is coming. Mariel wears coats." Her words had spelled things out. Clara started sneaking things out of the house. She used pieces of cloth with numbers on them to hide copies of burial records and names that were never written down in parish registers. Every 3 days, she sent them to someone in Renford by horse courier. Each package had the same wax mark, a broken bell. But her cover got thin. Sister Marcella kept an eye on her too much. For too long, the girls looked at her. On September 2nd, Clara woke up to find a note under her bed. "Your strength was your silence. You talked too much." She was called that evening. It was darker than she remembered in the room below the chapel. Now it's wider, cleaner, and better organized. Instead of chains, there are canvas restraints, and lamps are mounted along the walls so that sin doesn't hide in the shadows. Sister Marcella checked back at the end of the hallway, robes folded in front of them. "Wonderful," she said. "I remember your eyes." "I always did. When I held the basin, you looked up at me. You didn't jump." Clara didn't say anything. Marcella went on. "You were supposed to be one of the good ones. One of the girls who helps put things together." Clara said, "I did. I had every name on me. I never forgot about them." Then there was silence until Marcella stepped forward with a cold and bitter cloth in her hand. "Now you'll forget about them." She tried to touch Clara's face, but Clara stopped her. First to move. She hid a small vial of lamp oil from the garden shed in the sleeve of her robe. She also held a striker, the kind that is used to light candles in high chapels. First, she sprayed the cloth, then the wall, and finally her own sleeve. Marcella fell back in shock. Clara said in a whisper, "I didn't come here to die. But I'm not leaving until these lies are burned off of these stones." She then hit the flame. That night, the fire didn't completely destroy the asylum, but it did burn the floor of the chapel and try to get inside. The altar was broken, and the brass nameplate on the door to the incinerator was melted. Clara was not there when the sisters arrived. Ashes and a psalter open to Psalm 94 were all that was left. They hurt your heritage and crush your people, Lord. They kill the old woman and the traveler. They kill children without fathers. The next week, Boston newspapers got copies of the death records. Anonymous packages with a broken bell were sent to bishops' homes, and in the chapel of a small family home for kids in Vermont, a woman named, taught little girls how to speak again in their own words, slowly and clearly. The evidence was very bad. Dozens of fake ledgers, letters from girls who went missing, ledger entries with matching burns and blood smears. Photos of numbered sleeves, cracked bricks, and scorched hymnals were sent from different towns in Massachusetts and Vermont without their names being attached. By the end of 1880, more than 137 pages of evidence had been sent to skeptics, journalists, and a bishop. Albany, but no official charges were ever brought. The church started to look into things within itself. No one was caught. Due to her advanced age, Mother Agatha was deemed unfit to continue leading. She was taken to a hospice in Rome in silence. Sister Isolde was no longer listed in the Order of St. Euphemie's records. A rumor said she drowned while crossing the harbor on a ferry. Her body was never found again. Brother Thorne closed up shop, but no one ever saw him leave. His shop was locked up. The furnace was taken apart in silence. Sister Marcella was sent to a convent in the Pyrenees to rest spiritually. She died within a year, reportedly from a lung illness. An autopsy was not done. While administrative inconsistencies and regrettable oversights were identified, no criminal activity was substantiated. The Order of St. Euphemie acted in accordance with spiritual directives. The matter is closed. 3 weeks later, a journalist who had pushed for a criminal trial was found dead in a river near New Haven. Cause of death: drowning by accident. His notes were never found again. One bishop, who was personally bothered by the patterns, asked that St. Elora be deconsecrated, but the process took longer than expected. Changing priorities, red tape, and too much red tape. For the most part, the asylum was empty by 1883. The dorms were completely gutted. In the winter, the roof of the chapel fell off. It looked like fingers were grabbing back stone as vines crept over the east wall. Even though it was broken, no one touched the cold ward. Nearby, people wouldn't go near it. Kids pushed each other to run up. The steps and knock. None of them lasted more than a second. Some people said they could still hear the night choir calling out from under the floorboards. A woman named Miriam Wells wrote a letter to a Boston publisher in 1891. She worked as a housekeeper and was in her late 50s. She said in the letter that she was one of the first girls to be moved from St. Elora in 1859. She talked about what happened. They told us that God wanted us to serve Him. I cleaned the blood off of the flagstones. I was 12 years old. What my sister said last. It said, "Don't let them make you forget who you are." For 30 years they did. I'm sorry. The publisher put the letter in a file. The paper wasn't used. But in 1913, when the last of the asylum buildings were being torn down, something was discovered behind the altar. A locked iron box set into the rock. Inside, a psalter that was burned but could be read, a piece of hair wrapped in linen. A list of 143 names. There are no last names, only initials. One last note signed only by CM. Trust this if you find it. They built a place that girls could get lost in. Don't let it be quiet again. It was given to the historical committee which cataloged and lost it. The town of St. Elora is now just a field. The stones are now buried. The chapel bell is broken and lying in a museum basement with no marks on it. Rust has closed the old iron gate, and vines are growing through the bars like veins. There is no plaque, grave, or name on the gate, but some older people in the area still stay away from the spot. Some say that you can hear soft singing in the grass when the wind is just right. It is a lullaby, not a hymn. It was called The Home, on Red Hollow Hill, an orphanage that had been closed for a long time and was going to be torn down in the spring of 1998. The grounds were overgrown, and the chimney was only half there. A construction crew found a metal case stuck between the rafters behind a bricked-over alcove in the west corridor. It was small and locked with rust. There was a folded list of 143 first names inside a girl's journal with entries from 1861 to 1862. A girl dressed in numbered sheets in one picture and a broken incinerator door in the other. A child's rosary, melted in some places, and a letter was hard to read. We go away twice if no one remembers us. Don't worry about whether or not people will listen. Just tell the truth. CM. The initials are the same as those found years ago when St. Ia was being torn down. C.M. Clara Malin. This time, though, the box didn't get lost in a dusty archive. This time, someone paid attention. The person who found the body was Sarah Dorsey, a doctoral student at Wellesley who is studying the ethics of institutional care. The initials led her to a death record. In Vermont, she found Elora Miles D's death notice from 1922. On the other hand, Elra's letters had the same handwriting as the journal that was found in Red Hollow. The L has the same loops and T-strokes that aren't finished. It was her. Clara Malin lived and spent her last few decades writing and archiving, leaving a trail that anyone could follow. For the next 3 years, Sarah looked through state records, private church registries, and old diocesan files. The 143 girls told the same story for every name on the list she looked up. No death, certificate, no record of the transfer, and the church's records are no longer there. Her family never heard from her again. There were still some families living in the area. After many years of silence, most people had stopped asking, but Sarah's tears came when she knocked on their doors and told them what she had found. The silence ended. There were so many stories it was like open wounds in the light. Martha Wren, an old woman, told a story from her family about a girl named Joanna who ran away from a bad school. They said she ran away with some tramps, but my grandmother always said it in a whisper. That she got out was different. They never forgot about what she did. She had a necklace in her hand that had a broken bell on it. I believe it was hers. We should remember what she said. The New England Historical Society said they could help. In 2002, the Elora Memory Archive became a real project. Volunteers scanned pages, typed in fading ink, looked for burial plots, and compared parish records. They found 41 confirmed girl names whose dates of entry into St. Elora matched, but no dates of exit. They found pieces of. The ledgers of Sister Isolde can be found in a side collection at the Vatican called Apocryphal Teaching Records. They also found a note written by Sister Eugenie pressed between the pages of a lost hymnal. The heater cleans us up. We feel safe in the quiet. A small memorial was put up near the field where the asylum used to be on March 13th, 2005. Simple, just a black stone plaque for the 143 girls who were taken and kept silent, whose names are only known to God. They are remembered now. The truth isn't going to rot in the ground, in honor of survivors, family members, and witnesses. Every year since then, people have left gifts, note cards with numbers on them, small bells that don't ring, and every once in a while, the wind blows just right. It's out in the grass, a song with no words, a breath that got stuck in stone. In their minds, children were always waiting to be found.